Hey guys, welcome back to the Mind Body Broadcast with Austin and Marty. And today we are going to do another training related podcast. We've done a few talking about various things, training styles, intensity, all that jazz. Today we're going to talk about deloading or um, when you need to take a break, warning signs, and then also how you can go about deloading. There's so many methods to it, and I think it kind of goes back if you've listened to the Why Training Styles Suck episode. I believe that was the actual title.
Hmm.
It was. I don't think there's one way to do it, and there's several factors depending on how overreached are you, how overtrained are you, and I think that for me personally, there's also some psychological factors there too because some people just have a hard time. If I tell them, hey, don't train for a week, that won't work. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there are some psychological stuff that I like to take into consideration too. I'm sure you do as well. But yeah, let's dive into it. I think first maybe we should define
Yes.
the difference between overtraining and overreaching because there's ends of the spectrum. Are you a little bit stressed and worn out, or do you have like rhabdo and you're in the hospital?
Right.
You know what I mean? So yeah, you go for it. I know
Sure.
you're so
Yeah.
good
So,
at
so like, have I've always because for the longest time there was just the term overtraining, and that was like you said, the context wasn't there. It was just so convoluted of a term. It was like either like you were overtrained or you weren't. There was no approaching it in terms of the physical aspect to it, the mental aspect to it, the emotional aspect to it, but. So overtraining to me was always been where you have literally pounded yourself into the ground so far that now you are not moving up in numbers. Like you said, you have rhabdo, which is like I've experienced this, I think, maybe twice in my life. So it's very hard to get overtrained, very, very hard to be in, we'll call it a true overtrained mode where your brain, your CNS is just destroyed. Then the physical component to you is just destroyed. Like now the workouts that were not necessarily making you this physically sore are now making you absurdly physically sore to the point where now something that you would recovered from within a day or two, and now that you're not recovering from 3 or 4 days, and it's bleeding into your next workouts. Your sleep is disrupted. Your mental day to day routine is disrupted. It's just and these are those are the some of the signs that we're talking about there that just show me that it's time to definitely take a break. And that can what does that mean? It could mean from literally, like you said, it's going to be hard for some people to hear that, but taking a break fully out of the gym, not even lowering the volume down or lowering the training days down, but taking a full-on break. And then overreaching would be like a point in time where you almost plan to do this stuff for in preparation of a longer recovery period, such as like if you are you're ramping up for a show or you're trying to do some kind of super compensation or something. You're purposely trying to make yourself be overtrained, but you're doing it in a meaningful and deliberate fashion that you're not actually going to be overtrained, but you know that you're going to have that break kind of coming up.
Yeah, right. And it might not necessarily be premeditated. Like sometimes I can just see that somebody's kind of treading that overreaching area. And really, if you have a coach that knows what they're looking for and a client that can provide adequate feedback, you should be able to catch. You should be able to catch it before someone's completely buried.
Yes.
Most of the time, that ideally in an ideal world. And like I said, though, that also depends on what kind of feedback you're getting from the client. So with that, something that I notice, and we'll see if you kind of agree here, is that oftentimes what people miss out on with deloading or when you need to deload is that I'm personally not a fan of planned deloads pretty much ever. I do see instances where if somebody is very poor at providing feedback, that we might just for precautionary reasons provide those set deloads because they're just not going to tell me when they're
Right.
when they're reached. Yeah, so in that case maybe, but for the most part, if you think about training programming, when we change stuff, it's pretty subtle. We might change especially if they're progressing on the same training template, none of those variables are changed. So they're not going to report, if they report to you on a Monday and then they report to you on the following Monday, nothing in that week span of training is going to just automatically flip the script from good to bad.
Right.
9 times out of 10, it's outside factors that cause the total stress load to be too much. So it's almost always going to be accumulation. Well, it is always accumulation of stressors, but if somebody is overreached quickly, it's almost always because they lack sleep, or they had a really stressful week, or they had, bad relationship issues, or whatever, death in the family, you name it, it can happen. Now, this is where, to me, when I run into these situations, I don't always jump the gun. First, I'm going to look, okay, so is this stressor that you had last week, is this still going to be present this week?
Right.
And if it is, then okay, we might need to adjust the training. But if it's going to be gone, you're probably going to be all right. Like, we probably don't need to deload. We can probably just resume as normal, and you'll handle the stress, because a normal, healthy person we're equipped to handle short-term stressors and recover from them.
Yeah.
So those are something to consider. I just don't think there's enough consideration of the outside variables, and that's where people run into problems. They're just basing it strictly on whether or not they did more volume or intensity, and those things matter, absolutely. But you're in the gym for, an hour, 2 hours maybe, and you're outside the gym for 22 hours. There's a lot more room for stress.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'd say those are definitely the primary factors when I look into for being overreaching. Well, we even go and say false overreaching, in a sense of, exactly, are you really dipping into which part of you is being overreached? Is it your brain? Like, in terms of, you had all this extra, like, you said some very perfect examples there. Was there death in the family? Was there some severe relationship issues? Were there some financial stresses? Did something come up? Because that's not even going to necessarily be making you be overreached in terms of your workouts are crappy because of the physical component, but that mental, if you're distracted in the gym, you're usually benching X, and now you're only benching X minus 20, X minus 30, or whatever. You're not getting the same reps. That's just, it's one of those things. You go in, the workout's just sucking. Don't, I would say, outside of it being really deep into contest prep time, is just go home. Take those extra couple of days off, because you probably will need it, and then you'll be able to come back in and be able to be recharged and be able to smack some shit around again. Because I will tell you, it's just not worth it, because then if you're not paying attention, if you're not really there in the moment, trying to be able to train the way that's when you'll tweak something. That's when dumb injuries happen. That's when mistakes happen. That's when it could be something as so simple as the way that you usually flip the dumbbells up to get into the position for an incline bench press or a shoulder press, and you just are not there with it, and you just get out of your sync or out of your groove, something that we take for granted so many times, is being able to hoist those dumbbells up, and you do tweak something because your brain's not there. Like it's being aware of that stuff. And I think the number one reason why it's so imperative on the coaching that we as coaches ask this kind of stuff is because we don't see this coming. We'll either think that we either will over exaggerate it or under exaggerate it in terms of just how much that stress is getting to us. And so I'll say that on my clients' assessments all the time, is I don't need to know the exact stress. Like, you don't need to tell me every nitpicking detail about your relationship, or like you just lost, you had to remortgage your house or whatever for an exact financial amount or whatever. I don't need to know that, but I do need to know as objectively as you can be, how much is this getting to you? And that's when I will use sometimes a scale of 1 to 10. Be like, is it 10 out of 10 is like, this is the only thing you're thinking about and it's consuming your life? Or is this a 2 out of 10 where it's like, it sucks, but it's not affecting you? But because it's just like looking in the mirror some days. We are the worst judges of ourselves. The worst gauges of ourselves is just being able to take that into consideration and take that into, we'll say, real overreaching or real overtraining, because you just can't. So sometimes you have no idea how much it's affecting you, other than using the exact gauges of numbers in terms of, like I said, about the whole bench thing. If you're usually bench pressing X and it goes down, well, that's telling you something, right? And that's not necessarily going to be completely from the physical aspect too, because geez, getting like a relaxation massage can be something that could completely flip your week around. Whereas now, if you went into the gym and you did that workout because, that's what you're supposed to do, and that's what you're like, fight through the pain or whatever, but that could be a breaking point for you, and that could put you into that period of being overreached and not in the right way. It's like you said, it doesn't necessarily need to be premeditated or pre-constructed in terms of you wanting to do that, because shit happens, life happens, and it's knowing that it's like, how many times have you heard that, like, you have to go to the gym, like there's no way you can possibly, if you take that off, you're a failure, or then people will clients will guilt trip themselves and things, whereas that's not going to be conducive to your goals at all. That's going to be taking you away from it. And just and it doesn't need to be, like you said, I'm a big fan of that too, though, not planning and necessarily deload. Like now powerlifting, which is a whole other ball game. Like I know that's much more relevant for them, but like if you're in it's the flip side is, if you're feeling really good and you're supposed to have a planned deload or whatever like that, but now numbers are going up, the brain feels good, like everything is just, you're grinding away and you're getting results, then don't stop. Push that deload period back, because you could be shortchanging yourself out of some really whopping success or some gains there.
Yeah, you called it what did you say? False overreaching?
Yep, false overreaching. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a good term, and it's not always just like an acute situation. You don't just become, like I said, you just don't just become overreached overnight. So, and I get people too that kind of overanalyze one bad training session, think they need a deep. I'm like, well, no, I mean, that's just called being an adult,
yes.
and shit happens. We don't live in a bubble, so not every day is going to be perfect. And it's a double-edged sword when you monitor a lot of feedback like that. You're inevitably going to be more susceptible to just overanalyzing stuff. And, but yeah, so that's super relevant too, because this morning I had exact conversation with a client. Give you a real world example. He is strength-based client, super strong guy, deadlifts over 700 pounds.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, really crazy strong guy. And everything's been going good. He's actually in a fat loss phase right now, but he's still been hitting PRs, occasionally.
Nice. Yeah.
So you would call that, you would definitely say he's not overreached at that point if he's still hitting PRs at a deficit.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, moving along, this week he got hit by a wall. He hit the wall. So his client load had doubled, and his business he just said, truthfully, I was just not equipped for that quick of growth, and not necessarily a bad thing. He's going to figure it out, but yeah, we went through how's sleep, how's the stressors, anything else that changed. Really, the only thing that we could really manipulate that at that point was to back his training off.
Yeah,
that was it. We had no control over the other stressors outside of him just trying to keep his shit together and try to not be negative, stay positive and all that stuff. But yeah, I'm like, man, we have to take that stressor down. There's no other stressor that we can eliminate right now.
Yeah.
So that was totally unplanned. It wasn't planned at all, and he didn't foresee the business thing being corrected right away either. So,
there you go. Yep.
Right. So we just can't ignore it, have to fix it. So yeah, I mean, right there, that's an example of, what you might run into. And truthfully, like I said, I would say I run into that kind of overreaching from outside stress more so than overreaching from
physical means.
Right, just purely training.
Yep.
So I guess with that said, though, folks probably want to know what we would actually do to deload. Sure. And I mean, I can give a couple scenarios kind of see what the differences are. So
we can go over like how strategically some people would put them in if they were planned, something like that, right? Too, or like what you would do for if you see these warning signs. How do you gauge that? How do you deload? So yeah, you can start with that for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So probably one of the big factors I'm going to take into consideration would be that psychological factor too. I don't want, this sounds so ironic, but I don't want the person super stressed out because they're not training.
Yes. Yes.
And because how ass backwards does that sound? Like, what's the point? I mean, of course they're not training, but they're also sitting there anxious as hell all week and just dumping cortisol all week long because they're not training and they think whatever they think, right? They're going to get weak, lose muscle, get fat, whatever.
Yes. Sure.
So I'm definitely going to take that into consideration, and kind of two schools of thought there. I could either expedite the process by not training at all,
Sure.
or we could go a little bit slower and still train, but back off the training in some way. It's still going to work. I mean, it's still
Hmm.
going to accomplish the goal. It's just, it might take a little bit longer rather than, resting entirely.
Yeah.
So the resting entirely is pretty straightforward. I mean, how long you rest, it's just really going to depend on how, how overreached or overtrained somebody is. And it might not have to be a lot. I mean, if you're completely sitting out of the gym, you might feel pretty good in 3 to 5 days of just not doing anything, no cardio, no nothing. Other people, I might go a week if it's been a really long time and
Yeah.
they're really overtrained. But if we're just strictly talking about backing it off, there's a couple ways to do it. You're going to see, read so much with different experts talking about, well, you should back off volume, or you should back off intensity, or you should back off the load that you use. And frankly, there's two things I'm going to look at. One is, what is overtrained? Is it your nervous system,
Mm.
or is it you're not recovering from a muscular standpoint, or maybe both? But I find that most people in with the people that we're dealing with, their nutrition's pretty good. So
Right.
probably it's probably not a lack of muscular recovery most of the time. I find it's probably a lack of CNS recovery.
Mm.
And their nervous system is kind of the missing link there. And that's because that's where, nervous system, adrenal glands, all that, that's where a lot of the stress component comes in anyhow. And if you feel weak, yeah, I mean, if you don't eat for 3 days, of course you're going to go in the gym and feel weak. But with a constant nutrition, most of that's dictated by your nervous system and how it fires up and gets you ready to train. That's why things like caffeine work.
Mhm.
You know, that's why things like sleep impact you so much, because of your nervous system and your adrenal glands. And so I'm going to personally, I'm probably going to make sure that none of the training is to failure during that week.
Yep.
That's the biggest thing, because I've heard some people say, well, just train less volume, but you can still take it to failure. I'm like, nah, that kind of, to me, that
I
really
think that's defeating the purpose. I think so too. Yep.
yeah, I just don't agree with that. I mean, I just don't agree that that's going to recover your nervous system fast enough. I mean, it would still, if you're doing 20 sets to failure, which nobody's doing 20 sets to failure, but if you're doing, if you say you are, you're lying. But anyhow,
You're lying to our faces. Yeah.
if you're doing 20 sets to failure and then you back it off to 10 sets to failure, yeah, that is less, but it's still going to be a lengthy process. So I've even had situations where I only back the volume off slightly. Maybe I'll just take out an exercise or a couple of like the really demanding exercises or something. And I'll just say, hey, I basically want you to do your same template. And maybe I knock off a little bit of volume, but I want everything to be around a 5 to 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
And that's it. And to me, it's a happy medium for a lot of people, because they still get to go to the gym. They still get to get their blood flowing. They still get to feel like they're doing something. They're not feeling guilty when they're eating their meals,
Yep.
All that stuff. I just find that for the physique athlete, that just kind of accomplishes the best of both worlds when it comes to both physical recovery, nervous system, and, and the psychological part.
Yeah.
So
It's you summed it up so greatly there. When it all depends upon the person. Like there are some people that they'll feel guilty, they'll feel lost, they'll feel like this. Like let's be serious. Sometimes the gym can be one of the only sources of people's control or happiness in their life. Like that's their time. You know what I mean? Let's say they're busy with work, they've got a challenging home life or whatever, you name it, and then that's their time. This is their sanctuary, is going to the gym. And so being able to say don't go to the gym for that week, that might be something that would be ideal for them in terms of a physical and a mental and emotional component, but it's going to be robbed from them because they're going to be sipping into even more of a mental or emotional block, because now they're overthinking it or something like that too. So giving them that, like one of this, I usually try to aim for it around 50%, like you said, like, so that 5 to 7 out of 10 exertion rate, that's perfect. That's right on where I go. I still will say if you can bring yourself to mentally and emotionally be prepared for that deload time, or know that it is the best for you, is to get out of the gym. One of my lines I've said for years is give yourself a chance to miss it, because especially if you're dipping in there too. This is going to be a little bit off the tangent I'm going on though. But if you're starting to dislike the gym, one of my really good buddies just recently, he's like I don't understand how people can not enjoy going to the gym or like lose the love of training. And guess what happened? Just in the last 2 weeks, it happened to him. And he said, "Holy shit, I can't believe this is actually a thing." I said, "Yep, give yourself a break." Give yourself a break. Give yourself a chance to miss it, because if you don't, and if you now you'll start associating the gym or training with bad thoughts, with negative connotations, as in like you dislike going, or to extreme point you hate going, which that's what a rabbit hole that is. And that's get out. Give yourself some damn time to recoup and anything. I like, you don't necessarily need to fill in like a hobby or something else that's outside the gym, but sometimes I recommend that. Like, you know what I mean? If you usually don't, or even go play a sport, or go for a hike, or go do something, especially if you want to remain physically active or something along those lines, or but just give yourself a chance to not have to go in to do something, especially if, like I said, if you're dipping into that dislike or to that hate of the training, cool. And then that's contextual as well. Like, are you just disliking your one training program? Are you now you don't like the gym because now you might run into someone at the gym that you dislike because of a recent altercation or something like that? There's so much context here, especially because, and then that goes back into our original thing, is like, are you actually overreached, or are you actually overtrained, or are you just kind of creating this for yourself, right? Because we've all had those days that you just don't want to go. They just suck. And like you said, I love how you said that's being an adult. You know what I mean? Just no, okay, this is a day. This is not something like your example there of the guy that had his client load double or whatever. That's a real friggin' example. And if that's not going away, and then I say, it's use that exact line that you use, Austin. I say, how is this going to be? Is this stressor going to be resolved quickly, or is this something that's going to be ongoing? And then we have to, right? And especially, and I'll take it from a different angle there too, as not necessarily just training, but if they've been outside of, if they're not dieting for a show, if there's been a dieting phase, like maybe it's time to back off the calories for a bit. Like it's called the full diet break, and we need that. And I usually like to plan that. We've talked about this on the vacations episode. That's when I will, if someone's going to be deloading, I try to plan it around a time where so they don't have to be that guy or that girl that's on vacation in Mexico going to the gym. You know what? You're on damn vacation. Give yourself a chance to miss the gym. Don't worry about that stuff. The gym will always be there when you get back. But then have a period in time where you're actually over consuming calories, or at least bringing it back up to maintenance. And like you said there, it's not necessarily going to be just from a physical component in terms of you're not recovering from the workouts, you're not actually giving yourself rhabdo or anything like that, but you might just need a mental break from the dieting, because especially if you've been doing it for so long. And that was one of the things I wanted to bring up, is that to be actually overreached or overtrained, is especially in your first little bit. Like, I know most people listening to this aren't fresh newbies into the gym, but you can't get overreached or overtrained by bench pressing the bar. You know what I mean? Like, you've got to actually have some load on the bar. You got to be having some training to failure. Like, okay, if you've never known what training to failure really is, and you're not really blowing out your CNS, you're probably not going to need a break from the gym. And outside of taking a look at your sleep, taking a look at the total food, taking a look at, are you training 7 days a week, twice a week in the gym? Well, yeah, now maybe you're going to reach there, but you have to give yourself enough time to accumulate that muscle mass, to accumulate that intensity, that drive, to be able to even give yourself a chance to need a deload phase. So And I know that's kind of been popular in some of the recent stuff coming out, that people are working into their programs every 4 to 6 weeks, like having like a planned deload phase. And to me, that can be shortchanging you if you're not ready for that stuff. Like I said, advanced powerlifters, I know they will work this into their program every, like they do it in blocks or something like this, where every they'll either do medium reps and high load for this, and then low reps with high load for this amount of time, and that's cool. And then that's very much so when you're peaking for strength and stuff like that, which is not my arena, just from my understanding of it. That stuff becomes more and more important there. But it's all the subjective and objective things that you need to pay attention to so much more. Like, as in, yeah, if you are not recovering and you're waking up for whatever reason now in the middle of the night, you're just waking up. You don't have to go pee or anything like that, but you have restless sleeps or whatever, and okay, cool. You're dipping into probably overreaching, overtraining. And if it's been, like you said, you check in on every Monday or whatever, and you've been noticing now for 2 or 3 Mondays in a row that you're not hitting the same PRs or whatever, you're not hitting the same intensity level, okay, cool. This is when we're probably going to be needing to take a look into either one of those 50% weeks or 50% 2 weeks at the maximum type of thing, or just get out of the gym for a bit and just make sure that you have that time to, we'll say, actually recover, versus just because like you said, you nailed it when you said most people, their nutrition is darn good, like they're getting enough micronutrients, they're getting enough macronutrients, but sometimes it's going to be a blurry wall there, and you're going to have to really pay attention to that biofeedback.
Yeah, I agree. I just think going, the whole planning thing, it's just, we're way too dynamic. It's just, it's not that simple. And everybody likes, the thing is that too can become a little bit repetitive in the training. It's one of those things like, why fix what's working? That might be, I mean, I've had people that have made fantastic progress doing the same damn training block for 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, and then other times, it might not work very long at all. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people, when they look into the training component, they want to look into, I get asked this too. And like sometimes in like my Q&As and whatnot about different periodization schemes. I'm like, man, for strength, I like it. I have a couple friends, one guy in particular that's pretty high level strength athlete, and we've had this discussion, and he actually agrees with me too, because he comes from very much the periodization background, right? Because of it's strength based. Mm-hmm. And there is, you're right, peaking for powerlifting is different. And I just come up with the same answer almost all the time, is that unless you just really suck at being objective about the way you feel, I just can't see a scenario where this constantly hopping around, and periodizing and planning deloads is just going to be the best thing. Yeah. It's just because that's just not how we work. Now, it might be the best thing for a beginner, but as you become better at reading your feedback, or if you work with a coach that's really good at it, just good at paying attention to things like all the cues and stuff that you and I are talking about, it's not going to be better. And I rarely speak in absolutes about anything, but I could say that it's not going to be better, because how could it be better if you're literally going from something that's working and then stopping it?
Yeah.
It's not, when it's not necessary to do so. So yeah, it's just a very dynamic, it's a very dynamic process in the way that you analyze it, the way that you actually do the deloads, when you do the deloads. And I've done them a bunch of different ways for myself too, just to kind of experiment. I've tried the whole just lowering volume, keeping intensity. Didn't work very well for me because my CS is, yeah. And I found that kind of what you and I had talked about, especially for me, just if anyone cares, what I typically find for myself is I don't want to stay out of the gym too long, but over the years, like, I've become okay with a little bit longer, like I'm not going to freak out if I'm not in the gym for a day. I'm totally fine with it. But I'll typically do something like 3 to 4 days right off the rip for my deload. I'm out. not doing no training at all. And then I see how I feel. And then for the rest of the week, or maybe even 2 weeks, I'll just do submaximal training. I'll just go in 5 to 7 out of 10, go through similar volume, and I basically go until I feel good. And that might be I might just do the remaining 3 days of that week. It might be bleed into the next week, but I normally start with a few days right off the bat of no training. And that seems to work pretty good for me. I use this example as well. And I don't know how much we've talked about it. I know I've talked about it on podcasts, but with like all my past adrenal issues, when I had the real bad bout of adrenal insufficiency. And it's funny because at that time, and I mean, I was in a really bad spot. I was training only 4 days per week. I was setting aside 8 to 9 hours of sleep. I was eating in a surplus of calories. I was not doing any cardio. And I literally I had almost a 0 cortisol all day long. And it was all because I was stressed as hell.
Mm-hmm.
And that's crazy. Like, you would think I literally every single other component I was nailing. Good sleep hygiene. I've got my, I'm doing everything. And I was still completely tapped. Like, I was losing strength rapidly.
Right.
My body composition was regressing rapidly. I mean, this is a case of like actual overtraining, where I was in a really bad position. But yeah, again, there you go. Perfect example of the outside factors having such a large, impact there.
Yeah, I just like it's just we're gonna keep coming back to this. The entire thing is that to really be able to put yourself into that form of physical overreaching, overtraining it's way harder than what people make it out to be. The only time that I can really think back to where I know I was doing it to myself was when I was doing DC training, just because of for me, I can't keep at it for that long. It just wasn't the training style for me because of my CNS, like doing those super powerful 3 sets to failure rest pause sets that just hammered me. And I needed, like, I forget what Dante calls for exactly, but it's something like every 10 to 12 weeks you have to take that one deload week where it's you do either that the 50% training or you stay out of the gym for a full week. But I needed it, and man, it was just like knowing, because it was like right around that every 10 to 12 weeks I would start to get into that mode of being like, oh my god, I don't think I'm going to be able to beat those numbers. But then even looking back at it, it was still like my brain was playing tricks on me, right? Because if you've got to do those super heavy squat sets or whatever, even just like seeing the weight on the bar, it can go from exciting you to being crippling in terms of your mentality towards it. Like the excitement starts going away, and that's when to take a break. It's like, you've hit these PRs or whatever, you've had a really good round of blast and cruising or whatever for the cycles there for the DC training, and just being able to know when to take that break. But it will, if anyone's out there and they want to see what it's going to be as close as possible to getting to that physical overtraining, is do some DC training for a bit and actually really give like all those sets to failure. Like you talked about the whole true 20 sets to failure. Is that like, yeah, I believe you're lying as well. I just don't see anyone being able to really take it to that level day in, day out and go into the gym. Because and here's the funny thing is that DC training in its original purest form was only 3 days a week of training too. But you did in 2 weeks, you did your full body, I think 3 times. So you did full upper body and full lower body 3 times in those 2 weeks, and that just hammered you the way that it had it set up. So that would be one of the rare occurrences where, yeah, like paying attention to those deload phases and needing them would be imperative. But it's like, so we talked about too, like that sometimes it can be premeditated in terms of being the overreaching or overtraining. Like, let's say for instance, that you're going to be going on a 2-week vacation or a 2-week trip where there is going to be no access to a gym. And so maybe those 2 weeks leading up to the trip or whatever, you do an extra session of weights a week. Like if you're doing 5 days a week at the gym, now you're doing 6 days a week at the gym. or like, and I really don't recommend people doing 7 days a week of training. I just think it's completely unnecessary. Scott Abel completely changed my mind on that people can recover, but I think you need 1 full day off of weights for sure to be able to keep yourself going. And that's just being smart about training. And just like, as much as people love the gym and they want to go 7 days a week, it's just unnecessary. I think you can get all your workouts in at least in like 6 days a week. Even doing 6 days a week for a very long time is too hammering on the body and on the mind too. But yeah, so ramping that up before you're going to your vacation or to that trip where you're going to have no access to whatever, that can be it. So then you take that time off the gym, that full recovery mode, and then you come back and you don't have to worry about missing that groove. Because like if you were only doing 5 days a week of training and then you have that 2 weeks off and you weren't necessarily needing or ready to take those 2 weeks off of training, but if you ramp up the training volume, the training intensity, and then pretty much put yourself into that period of needing those breaks, can be one of the best things you could possibly do.
Yeah, I agree. That was actually, since we covered some of the scenarios, that was kind of one of the last things I wanted to recover. See,
Yeah.
my brain's in the right place. That was one of the last things I wanted to cover was, the actual planned overreaching, how you might utilize that. And yeah, I mean, I think we might have talked about that a little bit on the vacation episode that we did. Maybe we might have, but yeah, I mean, there's situations where you can, pre-plan, it's going to be less than ideal. And vacation, hey, that's one, but it could also be like, I gave that example this morning where the client load doubled. Well, maybe it's a work thing. Maybe that in 2 weeks, you are going to be working doubles every single day. You're going to be going from 40 hours a week to 80 hours a week. And you're probably only going to get in the gym on your 2 days off. Mm-hmm. That's it. Well, yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and push it. And then we'll just, let the muscles and CNS recover the rest of the time, and get as much rest as you can during those demanding work days. So I mean, stuff like that, if you can pre-plan, I don't see any problem with it. I mean, and you can do the same thing with fat loss, for example. We can kind of maybe push things a little bit harder in those situations where we know that coming up is going to be less than ideal. Mm-hmm. As long as it's a little bit harder with muscle gain because the muscle growth doesn't really work like that. Yeah. So it's not going to happen. But I think as long as you don't get in a habit of doing some extreme cycles just because you want to do something extreme and then back it off, or the food thing is the one with training. I'm a little more okay with it. It's more so with the food side of things, like that gets into the whole undereating and then overeating thing. You don't necessarily want to do that, but yeah, training wise, anything that ahead of time, you can always plan it. I see no problem with that. And it can be something super simple. Like you're going out of town for 5 days and 2 weeks ahead of time, you normally train 5 days a week. So you cram all 10 days in before you go. And that way you've still trained 10 days in a 2 week span or whatever. That's fine. It's okay. I mean, you're going to recover in those 4 or 5 days that you're gone, so because it's a short-term overreaching. So yeah, I think all that's perfectly fine. And I know there are methods out there as well that they do this intentionally, to get what they call, the slingshot effect. And I believe it's actually, there is a system coined slingshot training. Do you know who coined it? Was it Scott?
I don't know if it was him or not, but I'm trying to think when you said that. Yep. But I have heard of it as well.
Yeah. So there are systems where they will intentionally overreach, and then to get some extreme adaptation from that overreaching, and they can get like what they call a slingshot effect when they back off and then restart again. But to me, there's a lot of moving parts to that. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's also one of those situations where I've become more and more in the mindset of not messing with what's working. and not interrupting things in any kind of extreme. And the closer we can stay to homeostasis and still progress, the better.
Yep.
So I'm not one to do that type of thing very often, unless it's a situation like you and I mentioned where we know something's coming up. I'm probably not going to use a slingshot method intentionally just because, hey, what if it doesn't work like I wanted and we just disrupted perfectly good training that was progressing every week? Yeah, I'd feel like kind of an ass, you know? So
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because like especially for where I am in Alberta here, I have a lot of people that do some pretty crazy shift work. So they'll either do something like 10 days on, 10 days off, and these can be whopping hours at a time. They can be 10 days on, full of 12-hour days. And especially if it's a physical job, then you literally don't physically have the gas in the tank to do these intense workouts, or you literally don't have the time to do these workouts. So having like kind of two different phases to your training, like as in we'll say a work phase training and then a non-work phase training, is so that when you can give it, you can give it. When you can't, you can. That's just being smart about things. And that's not necessarily overreaching or planning to overtrain during those times, but it's just being smart about that, knowing, okay, I've already got limited sleep, I've already got limited time to cook, I've already got limited time to do life, so why would I hammer the crap out of myself then versus when I have these 10 full days off, when I have all this time in the world to be able to make those things happen? I am going to have a good sleep schedule. I am going to be able to eat with a little bit more of a meal plan structure to that. So, and that is like, I'll use your line again there. That's just being an adult, but that's also being especially if you're working with a coach, is letting them know things like that. And being very aware that during those weeks of, or days of being overtraining, in terms of like just not even so much overtraining, I take that back, during those days of where you're working so much, or you don't have the time or whatever, that your strength and your intensity probably is going to suck during those times. It's just being well aware of that too, and then like having it be like a go time, whereas when you're back home and you've got that lucrative schedule, like I've got at least 3 people off the top of my head I know that we do this exact phase to it, whereas we don't necessarily alter the workout itself, but we can. I have done where if someone's, their schedule is so ludicrous that we can only do, let's say, 2 or 3 full body workouts per week, and then when they're home they do like the 5 or 6, well, we'll say either upper lower or body part split or whatever, something different, that we do have kind of 2 different phases of the working out. But that still doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be overtrained or overreach. It's just planning that, like surfing the curve is what it is, right? You balance the time that you have with versus the amount of output that you can use, because to try to not always take any of those other factors into consideration, you're just asking for it. Then you are asking for you to put yourself into those higher levels of cortisol, and you are asking to put yourself into those periods of overreaching. You just don't let yourself get to that point.
It's funny you mentioned the 10 days on and off. I have this gal that I've worked with for a while in phases. We don't work with each other all the time. Sometimes she kind of does her own thing, but she must work. I know she works in Canada somewhere. It must be in that area, because she literally gets shipped out.
Yeah.
Works 10 days like on this, like in this, I don't even know what you would call it, plantation type of thing. And then she comes back home for 10 days.
Yep.
And
I'm not kidding. This is very common up here. Yeah.
We would literally do 10 days on training and then do only cardio while she was there, short sessions. And I tried so much different stuff. I mean, we eventually got things that work, but I was like, well, let's see what we can do with this. Cause she was patient, So I'm like, let's really mess with this and see what kind of funky setup we could make. And she would train every single day when she was home. And then when she was there, just cardio, and she would do intermittent fasting every day.
Sure.
On her work shift. And we would restrict calories more during work shifts, and then we would feed her when she would get home more. Yeah. And it worked. I mean, she was slowly, steadily losing body fat. And of course it's like super bizarre schedule, but I thought it was challenging, but it was kind of cool to have to work with something so dynamic like that.
No, and that happens way more often than not. Like I remember when I first moved here to Alberta, like just listening to and there's even extremes where like people will do 21 and 3, 21 days on and 3 days off. Like it's crazy. Or then I've got some guys that work overseas that will do month on, month off. So they're literally doing a month of 12-hour days straight. where and then they're on like an offshore oil rig where the gym is not the best, or they're like I had one client that would end up going to Egypt, and he said the food there was just so terrible. Like, I swear to God, the dude would lose 10 pounds when he went to Egypt because it was just greasy rice and I think like goat or some other really terrible protein sources there. And then he'd come home, we'd almost gain 10 pounds. So we had to really rework that just in terms of the training and the nutrition so that his goals were still being met. Because yeah, you are going to have these wacky situations that you have to take advantage of them and be like, take advantage of this potential overreaching and potential overtraining and make sure that you're going to make the best out of it. Because if you don't, then, you know, trying to ask them too much to do. Like, let's say we'll use the Egypt example. He's over there. The gym is not the best. The food's not the best. Why the hell would I pound the crap out of him with workouts if he's not going to be able to recover because the food is just not where he's at? And then like that exact scenario where you said you had the girl doing 10 on 10 off, I've used that multiple times where I've exactly fed them when they're home, and then when they're away, either not necessarily intermittent fasting, but that's a great strategy for sure. And if it worked for her, that's even better. You guys figured it out. That's great. But doing something along those lines where, yeah, you just cut it down to just cardio, because no, you're not going to lose your gains or anything else by having this 1 week of or these 10 days of just cardio per se or caloric restriction. No, because you've already done that enough of that training. Like you said, she trained every day for those 10 days she was home, and I would probably do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, what else can you do? I find, like I said, I've personally found it pretty interesting. I thought it was kind of a cool challenge to see what we could, like, see what kind of cyclical, you know, system we could create and make it work. And that's just further proof that, you know, it's further proof that, like you said, yeah, you're not going to lose all your muscle right away, and you're not going to, your body composition isn't going to deteriorate right away. And of course, yeah, when she got back, she was a little flat looking or whatever because, you know, she wasn't partitioning nutrients to her muscles, but it changed pretty quick. But yeah, lots of situations there. I think we went over quite a few.
That's awesome. I think that's going to be a lot to take away from that. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of the bottom line, like we said, it is very dynamic. Don't be closed-minded. Don't shortchange yourself. If things are working, kind of stick to the old adage, you know, don't fix it if it's not broken. And yeah, there you go.
No, I think that's good enough, man. I really like that. That was exactly what I wanted to get out. I don't have anything else to add. So from Austin and Marty here at the Mind Body Broadcast, we'll catch you next time.